a stranded billionaire, a desperate mechanic, and a wrapped deli sandwich. When a single father fixed a stranger's broken-down Maybach in a freezing downpour and asked only for her lunch as payment, he had no idea he had just triggered a multi-million-dollar domino effect that would alter his destiny. The rain hammering down on Route 9 inches upstate New York felt less like weather and more like a punishment. It was late November 2023, the kind of bone-chilling night where the cold sinks straight through your clothes and settles in your joints. Leo Harrison was already shivering. At 32, the single father looked a decade older, his face lined with the chronic exhaustion that comes from working 14-hour shifts and still falling behind. He was standing under the flickering neon sign of Moreau's Auto and Body in Cold Spring, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that was already stained black. His boss, a miserable man named Samuel, had just locked up the office, leaving Leo to secure the perimeter. Leo's mind wasn't on the rain. It was on his 7-year-old daughter, Mia. She was waiting for him at Mrs. Gable's apartment down the street. He was 3 days late on babysitting money, 2 months behind on rent, and his bank account had just been frozen by a predatory collection agency chasing his late wife's medical bills. All Leo had in his pocket was $4 and some change. Not even enough for a decent gallon of milk. That was when he saw the headlights. They were blinding, cutting through the deluge with LED precision. A sleek, midnight black Maybach S-Class limped onto the gravel shoulder just 50 yards from the garage, its engine smoking violently. The hazard lights blinked a frantic orange rhythm against the storm. Leo hesitated. He was off the clock. If he went home now, he could tuck Mia into bed and figure out how to stretch half a box of pasta for tomorrow's dinner. But watching the thick, white smoke billow from the luxury vehicle, his conscience gnawed at him. He pulled up his faded jacket hood and jogged toward the highway. Inside the Maybach, Veronica Croft was furious. At 41, she was the ruthless, highly publicized CEO of Croft Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar supply chain empire based in Manhattan. She was supposed to be at a black tie gala at the Plaza Hotel an hour ago. Instead, she had fired her chauffeur earlier that afternoon for a security breach, stubbornly decided to drive herself from a facility inspection in Albany, and was now stranded in the middle of nowhere. Veronica pounded her fist against the hand-stitched leather steering wheel. She grabbed her phone, no service. Of course, she was worth $4 billion, controlled shipping lanes across 3 continents, and was currently entirely powerless. A sharp tap on her reinforced window made her jump. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw a man in a soaked, grease-stained jacket. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, but his eyes were calm, non-threatening. Veronica lowered the window exactly 2 inches. "Ma'am, you need to step out of the car," Leo yelled over the roaring rain. "That smoke is smelling sweet. You blew a major coolant line, and if that block cracks, this car is going up in flames." Veronica scrutinized him. Her corporate instincts screamed stranger danger, but the smell of burning antifreeze filling the cabin confirmed his diagnosis. She grabbed her leather trench coat and stepped out into the freezing mud, her $600 designer heels sinking instantly. "My garage is closed," Leo shouted, guiding her under the narrow awning of the shop. "But let me pull it into the bay before the engine is completely destroyed." For the next 45 minutes, Veronica stood shivering in the damp, dimly lit garage, watching this stranger work. Leo didn't ask who she was. He didn't care about the custom designer clothes or the diamond tennis bracelet catching the raw bulb's light. He was entirely focused on the machine. He hoisted the car, found the ruptured hose, a catastrophic blowout caused by a piece of highway debris, and rummaged through the shop's scrap bins to find a reinforced silicone patch and heavy-duty clamps. He topped off the coolant, entirely bypassing the ruined serpentine segment to ensure the engine wouldn't overheat on the way back to the city. It was a masterclass in mechanical triage. "Try it now," Leo said, wiping his hands as he lowered the hydraulic lift. Veronica climbed into the driver's seat and pressed the ignition. The V12 engine purred to life, smooth and silent. She stepped back out, reaching into her coat pocket. She pulled out a platinum credit card. "You saved me an enormous amount of trouble. I don't carry cash, but whatever your highest emergency fee is, triple it." Leo looked at the card, then down at his oil-stained hands. "I can't take that." The The shop is closed. The register system is locked out. If I run that, my boss will just keep the money tomorrow anyway. Veronica frowned, confused by his refusal. Then give me your personal banking details. I will wire you $1,000 the moment I have a cellular signal. A shadow crossed Leo's face. The shame was palpable. I don't have an active bank account right now, ma'am. It's complicated. He shifted uncomfortably, his stomach letting out a quiet, hollow rumble that the garage acoustics amplified. Veronica stared at him. Here was a man who had just saved her a $200,000 asset and hours of misery, refusing a massive payout. Look, Leo said, his voice dropping softly. He pointed to the passenger seat of the Maybach. When I was fixing the dash warnings, I saw a brown paper bag from Katz's Deli on your seat. It hasn't been touched. Veronica glanced at the car. My assistant bought that for me hours ago. I haven't had time to eat. If you aren't going to eat it, Leo swallowed his pride, looking her dead in the eye, I'd take that sandwich. My little girl Mia, she loves turkey. And, to be honest, I haven't been able to afford much groceries this week. If you give me that sandwich, we'll call it even. Silence hung heavy in the damp garage, broken only by the sound of rain lashing against the tin roof. Veronica felt a strange, sharp tightness in her chest. She had spent the last 20 years in boardrooms with cutthroat executives who would sell their own mothers for a fraction of a percent in stock. Yet here was a man, drowning in poverty, asking for a cold turkey sandwich so his daughter could eat. Without a word, Veronica walked to the car, retrieved the deli bag, and handed it to him. Thank you, Leo smiled, a genuine, warm expression that completely transformed his tired face. Drive safe, ma'am. Keep it under 60 until you get to your dealership. Veronica got into her car and drove away into the stormy night. As she watched the lone mechanic shrink in her rearview mirror, clutching the paper bag like it was a brick of gold, a tear slipped down her cheek, a rare occurrence for the Iron Queen of Wall Street. She picked up her phone as the bars finally returned to the screen and pressed a speed dial number. Jonathan? Veronica commanded, her voice thick with emotion but laced with sudden, sharp determination. I need you to find everything there is to know about a mechanic working at Moreau's Auto in Cold Spring. His name is Leo. Jonathan Reed was a man who specialized in ghosts. As the head of global security for Croft Logistics, he was an ex-intelligence operative whose usual Tuesday involved corporate espionage and background checks on foreign dignitaries. So, when Veronica Croft called him at 11:30 p.m. demanding a deep dive into an upstate grease monkey, he knew something profound had happened. By 6 a.m. the following morning, while Veronica sat in her Tribeca penthouse nursing a black coffee, a heavily encrypted tablet was slid across her marble kitchen island. Leo Harrison. 32 years old, Jonathan said, standing at parade rest. Clean criminal record, exceptional credit score until 2 years ago. That's when his wife, Emily, was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. She passed away 14 months ago. Veronica stared at the digital file, scrolling through a photo of Leo, smiling with a beautiful blonde woman and a tiny, laughing toddler. The medical treatments decimated his savings, Jonathan continued, his voice devoid of judgment but heavy with facts. He sold his house, liquidated his retirement funds, and moved into a low-income apartment complex on Elm Street in Poughkeepsie. 3 weeks ago, a private debt collection firm slapped a freeze on his bank account for the remaining $80,000 in medical debt. He literally has zero access to currency outside of the physical cash in his pockets. Veronica's jaw tightened. Who is the collection agency? Jonathan hesitated, a rare break in his stoic demeanor. That's the complication, Miss Croft. The agency is Apex Financial Recoveries. Veronica stopped breathing for a second. Apex Financial Recoveries was a subsidiary acquired by Croft Logistics 3 years ago during a massive corporate buyout. Her own company was the entity starving the man who had saved her. There's more, Jonathan said quietly. I ran a check on the garage where he works. Samuel Moreau, the owner, finalized a sale of the property yesterday afternoon to a commercial real estate developer. The garage is being demolished to build a strip mall. The employees are being terminated today. Veronica stood up so fast, her chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. The turkey sandwich, the cold rain, the desperate, proud look in his eyes. He had fixed her car knowing he was going home to a frozen bank account. and today he was going to lose his only source of income. "Get my car ready," Veronica ordered, her eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying focus. "Not the Maybach! Get the armored SUV! We are going back to Cold Spring." Meanwhile, 60 miles north, Leo's morning had shattered into pieces. He had walked into the garage at 7 a.m., holding a cup of cheap convenience store coffee, only to find the bay doors locked. Samuel Moreau stood outside with a clipboard, flanked by 2 men in hard hats. "What's going on, Sam?" Leo asked, a pit forming in his stomach. "Shop's closed, Leo," Sam said, not even making eye contact. "Sold the lot. Developer wants it cleared by Monday. Here's your final check." Sam handed over a thin envelope. Leo opened it. It was for $200. "Sam, this is less than half of what you owe me for the week," Leo said, his voice rising in panic. "And what about severance? I have a kid. I'm facing eviction. You can't just blindside me like this." "Read the contract you signed when you started," Sam scoffed, turning his back. "You're an independent contractor. I don't owe you a dime of severance. Pack up your tools and get off the property." Leo stood in the freezing morning air, his world collapsing. The check in his hand was useless. If he tried to cash it at a bank, Apex Financial would absorb it instantly to pay off the medical debt. He had absolutely nothing. An hour later, Leo was walking back to his cramped apartment. He opened the door to find Mia sitting on the worn-out rug, drawing with crayons. The apartment was freezing because the radiator had been shut off again. "Daddy!" Mia cheered, running over to hug his legs. "You're home early." Leo forced a smile, swallowing the bile of failure in his throat. He knelt down and hugged her tightly, burying his face in her shoulder so she wouldn't see the tears brimming in his eyes. "Yeah, sweetie," Leo whispered. "Daddy has some time off." "Did you bring another sandwich?" she asked innocently. "The turkey one from last night was the best I ever had." Leo closed his eyes. The weight of his utter helplessness was crushing him. "No, baby, no sandwich today." There was a heavy knock on the apartment door. Leo froze. He knew that knock. It was the building manager. He had warned Leo that if the rent wasn't paid in full by Friday morning, he would be calling the sheriff to enforce the eviction notice. Leo stood up slowly, telling Mia to go to her room. He walked to the door, took a deep breath, and prepared for the final blow. He turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open, expecting to see his angry landlord. Instead, a massive, muscular man in a tailored dark suit stood in the hallway. Behind him, the entire corridor seemed to be filled with imposing men in identical security attire. "Leo Harrison?" Jonathan Reed asked, his voice echoing in the rundown hallway. "Yes?" Leo replied, his heart hammering against his ribs. "If you're from the collection agency, I swear I don't have anything left to give you." The wall of men parted down the middle. Stepping through them, wearing a sharp, tailored white business suit that looked wildly out of place in the dingy apartment complex, was the woman from the broken-down Maybach. Veronica Croft looked at Leo, then peered past him into the freezing, empty apartment. "Hello, Leo," Veronica said, her voice softer than it had ever been in a boardroom. "I believe we have some unfinished business regarding my bill from last night." Here is the continuation of Leo and Veronica's story, diving into the life-altering twist and the corporate dangers that followed. The silence in the cramped, freezing apartment was deafening. Veronica Croft stood perfectly still, her pristine white suit a stark contrast to the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling of Leo's living room. Behind her, Jonathan Reed stood like a stone statue, his eyes scanning the perimeter with professional detachment. "Unfinished business?" Leo repeated, his voice barely a whisper. He stepped back, instinctively putting himself between the imposing strangers in the hallway leading to Mia's bedroom. "Look, if this is about the diagnostic fee, I told you we were square. You gave me the sandwich, we had a deal." Veronica looked around the room. She noted the heavy coats draped over the small sofa, the space heater that was plugged in but dead, and the single box of generic pasta sitting on the kitchenette counter. Her gaze finally rested on Leo, whose shoulders were rigid with defensive terror. "My name is Veronica Croft," she said, her voice steady but lacking its usual boardroom bite. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Croft Logistics. And as of 3 years ago, my corporation acquired a subsidiary named Apex Financial Recoveries." All the blood drained from Leo's face. He stumbled backward until his legs hit the edge of a worn armchair. You own the agency. You're the ones who froze my accounts. You're here to take what's left. I am here to do exactly the opposite, Veronica said firmly. She reached into her tailored blazer and produced a thick, embossed folder. She set it gently on the small, scratched coffee table. At 8 a.m. this morning, I personally audited your file, Veronica explained, her eyes locking onto his. $82,000 in medical debt accrued during your late wife's battle with cancer. The aggressive collection tactics used against you violated 2 of my company's internal ethical directives. As of an hour ago, the executive responsible for your case has been terminated. Leo stared at the folder, his mind unable to process the words. Open it, Jonathan Reed instructed quietly from the doorway. With trembling hands, Leo opened the folder. Inside was a zero balance statement from Apex Financial. Beneath that was a cashier's check made out to Leo Harrison for $25,000. That check is compensation for the undue distress my subsidiary caused you and your daughter, Veronica said. Your bank accounts have been unfrozen. You owe us nothing. Leo dropped the folder as if it burned him. He covered his face with his calloused, grease-stained hands, a ragged sob tearing from his throat. The crushing weight that had been suffocating him for 14 months, the fear, the debt, the constant panic of failing his daughter shattered in an instant. Thank you, Leo choked out, falling to his knees. My God, thank you. Stand up, Leo, Veronica commanded gently. I didn't come all the way to Poughkeepsie just to play philanthropist. I came to make an investment. Leo wiped his eyes, looking up in confusion. Last night, I watched you bypass a catastrophic engine failure on a German-engineered V12 engine using scrap silicone and sheer mechanical instinct, Veronica stated, her business persona returning. Croft Logistics is currently developing a fleet of autonomous, high-yield freight trucks. Our Ivy League engineers have spent $90 million on the software, but the physical prototypes keep failing under real-world stress. The engineers only understand the computers. I need someone who understands the machine. She pulled a heavy, metallic keycard from her pocket and tossed it onto the table beside the check. That is all access clearance to my advanced research facility in Queens, Veronica said. I am offering you the position of Chief Ground Level Diagnostics Director. Starting salary is $180,000 a year, full benefits and a signing bonus. Do you accept? Before Leo could even form a syllable, heavy footsteps echoed in the outer hallway. The door swung wide open, revealing Gus, the building's notoriously ruthless landlord. Harrison! Gus barked, holding a pink eviction slip. Time's up. The sheriff is on his way. Gus stopped dead in his tracks, suddenly realizing the tiny apartment was filled with massive men in tactical suits and a billionaire CEO glaring at him with absolute contempt. Jonathan Reed stepped forward, towering over the landlord. He pulled a checkbook from his breast pocket, scribbled a number, and shoved it into Gus's chest. That covers Mr. Harrison's rent for the next 12 months, plus a penalty for harassment, Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. You will cancel the sheriff, and you will have the radiator in this unit fixed within the hour, or I will personally ensure your building is condemned by the city inspector before sunset. Do we understand each other? Gus swallowed hard, clutching the check. Yes, sir. He turned and bolted down the hallway. Leo looked at Veronica, then toward the hallway where Mia was peeking out, holding her favorite stuffed bear. He looked back at the keycard on the table. Miss Croft, Leo said, his voice finally steady, filled with a new, burning resolve. When do I start? 6 weeks later, the world had completely inverted. Leo was standing on the pristine, epoxy-coated floor of the Croft Advanced Research Facility in Queens. He was wearing a dark blue uniform bearing the silver Croft insignia, holding a digital tablet instead of a rusted wrench. His bank account was healthy, Mia was enrolled in a beautiful private elementary school, and the dark circles under his eyes had finally faded. But replacing the stress of poverty was a new, entirely different kind of pressure. You're torquing the manifold bolts unevenly, Leo pointed out, tapping the shoulder of a junior mechanic who was working on the massive engine block of an experimental autonomous freight truck known as Project Vanguard. The specs say 40 foot-pounds, but you're doing it in a circle. You have to use a star pattern or the heat expansion will warp the seal. The mechanic nodded quickly and adjusted his grip. Leo was excellent at his job. He had streamlined the assembly process, cutting prototype breakdown times by 20%. But his sudden, meteoric rise from a small-town garage to a six-figure directorship had made him a massive target. Standing on the catwalk above the assembly floor, glaring down at Leo, was Warren Baxter. Warren was the vice president of engineering for Croft Logistics. He was a man composed entirely of sharp angles, expensive cologne, and ruthless ambition. He held 3 degrees from elite universities and despised the fact that Veronica Croft had installed a street-level grease monkey in his division. Worse, Warren had a massive secret. Project Vanguard was running terribly over budget, and to hide it, Warren had quietly switched the supplier of the engine's thermal cooling jackets to a cheaper, unvetted overseas manufacturer, pocketing the surplus funds as a consulting fee. If the prototypes failed, Warren knew Veronica would launch an audit. He needed a scapegoat. He needed Leo Harrison to fail. Later that afternoon, the facility's emergency sirens blared. Red lights flashed across the assembly bay as Prototype 4, the flagship vehicle scheduled to be demonstrated to federal regulators next week, began venting thick, acrid smoke from its hood during a dyno stress test. Leo sprinted to the control booth, slamming the emergency kill switch. The massive engine whined to a halt, hissing violently as coolant boiled over the titanium headers. Before Leo could even unlatch the hood to inspect the damage, the bay doors slid open. Warren Baxter marched in, followed closely by Veronica Croft and Jonathan Reed. "I told you this was a mistake, Veronica," Warren sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the smoking truck, then at Leo. "Your pet project here is destroying millions of dollars of hardware. My telemetry data shows the engine overheated because the cooling jackets were improperly installed by Harrison's assembly team." Veronica's expression was unreadable. She looked at the smoking engine, then at Leo. "Is this true, Leo? Did your team misalign the cooling systems?" "No, Miss Croft," Leo said firmly, refusing to be intimidated by Warren. "My team followed the assembly schematics to the letter. We double-checked the seals before the stress test began." "The data doesn't lie," Warren snapped, shoving a tablet toward Veronica. "Thermal runaway started at the base of the jackets. It's human error, assembly error. Harrison is in over his head, and he's going to cost us the federal contract. I want him and his crew off the floor today, and my private contractors brought in." Veronica looked at the tablet, her brow furrowing. The digital data did indeed show a catastrophic failure originating from the installation point. She turned back to Leo, the disappointment evident in her eyes. "Leo," Veronica said softly, the boardroom ice creeping back into her tone. "I took a massive risk on you, but I cannot allow sentimentality to tank $1 billion launch. If this was your team's error—" "Give me exactly 4 hours," Leo interrupted, his voice echoing in the quiet bay. Warren laughed out loud. 4 hours to do what? Make up an excuse? 4 hours to tear this engine block down to the studs, Leo said, his eyes locking onto Veronica's, ignoring Warren entirely. "Computers only show you where the heat happened. They don't show you why. Let me look at the metal. If I made a mistake, I'll pack my locker and leave today." Veronica stared at the man who had asked for a turkey sandwich in the freezing rain. She recognized that same desperate, honest fire in his eyes. "You have 3 hours, Veronica said. She turned on her heel and walked out, Jonathan Reed shadowing her. As soon as the doors closed, Warren stepped up to Leo, dropping the corporate facade. "You're done, grease monkey. You can't outsmart the telemetry. Start packing." Leo didn't say a word. He grabbed his heavy-duty impact drill, pulled on a pair of thermal gloves, and walked toward the smoking, violently hot engine. For 3 grueling hours, Leo worked like a man possessed. He stripped away the exterior housing, disconnected the heavy fuel rails, and meticulously unbolted the ruined thermal cooling jackets. His hands were blistered from the residual heat, his uniform soaked in sweat and black oil. He laid the pieces out on a steel diagnostic table, shining a high-intensity halogen flashlight over the warped metal. He checked his team's bolt threads. They were perfect. The seals were flawless. The installation was textbook. So why did it melt? Leo picked up one of the fractured cooling jackets. It was supposed to be forged from aerospace-grade tungsten alloy to withstand extreme temperatures. But as Leo ran a metal file across the jagged, broken edge of the jacket, the metal shaved away easily. Too easily. He held the shavings up to the light, recognizing the dull sheen immediately. It wasn't tungsten. It was a cheap aluminum zinc blend. Leo's eyes widened. The installation wasn't the problem. The parts were fraudulent. They were melting from the inside out before the coolant could even circulate. Just as the digital clock on the wall hit the 3-hour mark, the bay doors opened again. Veronica walked in, expecting a resignation. Warren strutted in beside her, wearing a smug, victorious grin. "Well, Harrison," Warren demanded, "ready to admit your team ruined the prototype?" Leo didn't look at Warren. He walked straight to Veronica and dropped the heavy, fractured piece of metal onto the steel table between them with a loud clang. "My team didn't fail," Leo said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. He handed Veronica the heavy metal file. "Try to file that down." Veronica looked confused but took the tool. She scraped it against the metal, watching the silver ribbons peel off effortlessly. "Tungsten alloy doesn't shave like that, Miss Croft," Leo stated. "That's an aluminum blend. It's cheap, it's weak, and it physically cannot withstand the thermal output of a V12 diesel prototype. The engine didn't overheat because of bad assembly. It overheated because whoever ordered these parts bought counterfeit garbage." The smugness vanished from Warren's face instantly, replaced by a ghost white pallor. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a mechanic, not a metallurgist. Veronica slowly lowered the file. Her piercing eyes shifted from the cheap metal shavings to Warren's sweating face. She didn't need a computer to read the sheer panic radiating off her vice president. "Jonathan," Veronica said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. Jonathan Reed stepped out from the shadows of the catwalk. "Yes, Miss Croft?" "Lock down Mr. Baxter's office," Veronica ordered. "Seize his hard drives, his personal phone, and pull all purchase orders for the Vanguard supply chain. Nobody steals from my company." "Wait, Veronica, please," Warren stammered, backing away as Jonathan's security team materialized at the doors. "It was a supply chain error, a vendor mistake." "Get him out of my sight," Veronica snapped. As Warren was escorted out of the bay by security, protesting loudly, Veronica stood alone with Leo. The massive bay was quiet again. She looked at the dismantled engine, then down at Leo's blistered, oil-stained hands. He had done it again. He had found the truth buried in the grease and the grit, saving her empire from a catastrophic public failure. "It seems," Veronica smiled faintly, "that my investment is paying exceptional dividends." With Warren Baxter formally indicted on federal charges of corporate fraud and industrial sabotage, the shadow hanging over Croft Logistics instantly evaporated. However, the crisis had left a massive leadership vacuum in the Vanguard division, and the highly publicized presentation to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration was only a week away. Veronica didn't hesitate. She completely restructured the division's hierarchy, removing the bureaucratic layers of Ivy League executives who had never touched a wrench in their lives. In their place, she officially named Leo Harrison the Vice President of Global Mechanical Engineering. For the next 7 days, Leo practically lived at the Queen's facility. He brought a radical, working-class pragmatism to the billion-dollar project. He ordered the elite software developers down to the assembly floor, forcing them to physically interact with the machinery their code was supposed to control. He sourced, verified, aerospace-grade tungsten components from a legitimate supplier in Ohio, working shoulder to shoulder with his team until their hands bled to rebuild the flagship prototype from the ground up. When the day of the presentation finally arrived, the atmosphere at the testing grounds in Virginia was electric. Representatives from the Department of Transportation, military logistics generals, and executives from industry titans like Penske Logistics and FedEx were all in attendance. They watched in absolute stunned silence as the Croft Vanguard truck, a 72,000-pound mechanical behemoth, navigated a grueling, rain-slicked obstacle course entirely autonomously. It performed flawlessly, stopping within fractions of an inch of its safety margins. The engine temperatures, monitored strictly by Leo from the command center, remained perfectly stabilized. When the truck crossed the finish line and the air brakes hissed in victory, the viewing stands erupted into applause. In that single afternoon, Croft Logistics secured a multi-billion-dollar federal defense contract, cementing the company's legacy for the next century. That evening, a private celebration was held at Veronica's sprawling Tribeca penthouse. The room was filled with politicians, board members, and high society elites. Yet, Leo stood quietly on the balcony, nursing a glass of sparkling water, looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. He felt a world away from the freezing rain of Cold Spring. The heavy glass door slid open, and Veronica stepped out into the crisp night air, handing him a small, velvet-covered jewelry box. "I don't need a bonus, Veronica," Leo smiled gently. "You've already given Mia and me a life I never thought possible." "It's not a bonus, Leo," she replied, her voice uncharacteristically soft, trembling with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "Open it." Leo carefully popped the hinge. Inside, resting on the velvet cushion, was a piece of brown paper, carefully folded and preserved behind a thin layer of protective acrylic. It was the receipt from Katz's Deli, dated the exact night they had met. Leo looked up, deeply confused. "I never told you why I was driving myself that night," Veronica said, looking out at the city lights, "or why I kept the subsidiary that was tormenting you. 3 years ago, when we acquired Apex Financial, I was supposed to dismantle it. But looking at their ledgers, I saw the sheer volume of medical debt crushing thousands of families. It reminded me of something I had spent my entire adult life trying to forget." She turned to face him, tears welling in her sharp, commanding eyes. "My father was a mechanic in Detroit," Veronica confessed, a profound sadness cracking her armor. "When I was 11, he suffered a massive coronary failure. We had no insurance. He discharged himself from the hospital against medical advice because he was terrified of the billing. He went back to work the next morning to keep a roof over my head. He died on the garage floor, covered in grease, holding a wrench." Leo felt his breath catch in his throat. He stared at the billionaire, finally understanding the silent, unbreakable bond she had formed with him. "I spent decades building this empire, becoming cold and ruthless, purely out of a defense mechanism," Veronica whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I thought money could shield me from the pain of the world. But when you stood in the freezing rain, shivering, completely broken by the same system that killed my father, and all you asked for was a sandwich to feed your little girl, it broke me. You showed me that humanity still exists in the darkest places." Leo closed the box, pulling Veronica into a tight, grounding embrace. For the first time in 30 years, the Iron Queen of Wall Street wept openly, finally letting go of the grief she had carried for a lifetime. "We are going to fix it," Veronica said fiercely as she pulled back, her eyes shining with renewed purpose. "Tomorrow morning, I am stepping down as the operational CEO of Croft Logistics. I am appointing you as the Chief Operating Officer." "Veronica, I can't run an empire," Leo gasped, stunned by the proposition. "You won't be alone. Jonathan will handle the corporate warfare. You will handle the people," she smiled warmly, "because I need to focus my entire attention on my new venture. I am liquidating $1 billion of my personal stock to launch a nonprofit foundation. We are going to systemically buy out and forgive the medical debt of every single parent household in the United States." Leo was speechless. The magnitude of her words washed over him like a tidal wave. "And I am naming it," Veronica said, placing her hand gently on his shoulder, "the Emily Harrison Memorial Foundation." A choked sob escaped Leo's lips as he heard his late wife's name. The crushing nightmare of his past had officially been transformed into a beacon of salvation for millions. 4 years later, the world had fundamentally shifted. The Vanguard trucks revolutionized global shipping, making Croft Logistics the undisputed titan of industry. But their greatest achievement wasn't machinery. The Emily Harrison Foundation had successfully abolished over $800 million in predatory medical debt, saving thousands of families from the exact eviction and terror Leo had once faced. On a bright, warm Sunday afternoon, Leo walked through the lush, manicured grounds of a private cemetery in upstate New York. He was holding the hand of his 11-year-old daughter, Mia, who was chattering excitedly about her middle school science fair project. Walking directly beside them, looking relaxed and radiant in a simple floral dress, was Veronica. They reached a beautiful marble headstone under a sprawling oak tree. Leo knelt down, placing a fresh bouquet of white lilies against the stone. He closed his eyes, no longer feeling the paralyzing sting of grief, but only a deep, abiding peace. He had lost his world to an unfair system, but in the freezing rain, he had chosen kindness over bitterness. He had fixed a broken engine for a stranger, and in return, that stranger had fixed his life. Did this incredible story of resilience, integrity, and unexpected kindness move you? Sometimes, a simple act of humanity like fixing a broken engine for a sandwich can completely shift the universe. If Leo and Veronica's life-changing journey inspired you today, please hit the like button, share this video with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life stories. Never lose faith.